Greetings, everybody in the room, those online, those checking it out on the Moon campus or the classic venue. Glad to be together with all of you as we kick off a new series here today. There's a couple by the name of Carl and Tiffany Ledbetter. They love to spend time in their home together, just not in the same room. Yeah, actually there was a Wall Street Journal article that wrote about them, about their home, about the modifications they'd made to their home. It was called The Dysfunctional Family House. Wall Street Journal wrote up about this couple. It was a big house, large place, and they made sure that they had spaces and ways that they could avoid one another. And so they all had their own bedrooms, they all had their own sitting rooms, they all had, even in some places, independent hallways that they could walk so they would be sure they wouldn't run into anybody else from the family. They had an escape room for when you definitely didn't want to even possibly run into somebody. They would go to one of these escape rooms. And Mr. Ledbetter said he loved the house because it gave them so many ways to avoid one another. Think about it. Just for a minute. And apparently, the Ledbetters aren't alone, because it used to be a little while back that one of the primary ways that people would build their houses were with open floor plans to try to maximize family interaction, right? Well, now large builders are telling us that people, what they want nowadays are more walled-off spaces. So he says they're building things like one-person secluded internet alcoves and in isolation rooms that they can go off to and be alone. He said it's perfect. One of these builders said it's perfect for the dysfunctional family. Interesting. How many of you would like to get a blueprint for that? No. Of course you wouldn't want a blueprint for that, because we're looking at something different as we think about it. Now, whether you consider your family to have some dysfunction in it or not, families are interesting places. I cannot think of any place where if you get it right, it'll bring greater joy, or if you get it wrong, it can bring greater pain than in the home, than in the family. And we want to be people who are not stuck in the dysfunctional side of things. We want to move to the other side and learn how to become the flourishing family. That's who we want to be. That's how we want to move ourselves forward. And today we're actually kicking off a new series we are calling Family Matters. To us around here, the family matters, so we're going to talk about some family matters. And that's how we're using that title here as we make our way along. Naturally, we believe that the family matters. Of course we do. But this is vitally important because here's the thing. All of our families can get better. Can we just start by acknowledging that? Can we just start by saying that not all of us in our families are everywhere that we can or should be? And so there's room for growth, and we're going to be thinking about that in this series. Your family might consist of you as a single individual. You're a family of one. Or your family might be you and your spouse. Or it might be you and your spouse and 11 kids. Or it might be you and no spouse and 3 kids. There are a variety of different ways that we see the family, or different sizes of families and all of that. And just looking around the room right now, I see a variety of different circumstances that you are living in. A lot of different circumstances, but we all have room to grow. So for over the next 5 weeks, we are going to be taking a look at family matters, and we're going to be considering some of these topics here. We're kicking off today with the flourishing family discipleship. Next week, then we'll get on to marriage and singleness and sexuality in this series. I would encourage you to be coming back yourself, but also bringing others that you think might benefit in some of these particular weeks, and indeed all the way along. Well, we're getting started by considering some principles that we can glean out of one particular family that we find in the Bible that most definitely we could say had some dysfunction in their family. We find them in the Bible all the way back in the book of Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. If you're not familiar with your Bible, I encourage you to open one up and turn it. It's the very first book of the Bible, and we're going to be starting off in Genesis chapter 29. It's where we're going to at least get kicked off. We'll be bounce around through a few different chapters there at the end of Genesis here today. You know, sometimes you can learn important lessons from positive examples. Sometimes you can learn lessons through negative examples, and in this particular case, we're going to be taking a look at Jacob's family. We're going to see both. We're going to see both. Definitely some dysfunction, and then there's some good stuff tucked away in there as well. And so we're going to look at some of the dysfunction, see what we might learn from what we see there, so that we might become then the flourishing family, the opposite side of that. Again, sometimes it's helpful to see the negative in order to grow toward the positive. So, first of the principles that we learn from Jacob is this: don't allow deception. First thing that we can learn from him, principle, don't allow deception. Deception is a very dangerous reality that you can find in most every home on some level, and it leads to tremendous pain on the part of the one who is being deceived in that home. And inevitably, almost always, the one who is being deceived ends up turning around and ultimately deceiving, or even better, looking at it the other way, the one who is doing the deception, one of the things is it usually turns around to haunt them, and it comes back on them. And Jacob is certainly a prime example of that. In Genesis 29, we find that Jacob has gone to live for a time with his uncle Laban. He's been encouraged to go off there by his mother to go and find a wife. And indeed, he finds the girl of his dreams there with Uncle Laban. In fact, it's his daughter, a girl by the name of Rachel. Laban agrees to let Rachel marry Joseph under one condition. He has to be his servant for 7 years, and then he gets Rachel. Serve for 7 years, then he gets Rachel. If only I had thought about that when my now son-in-law, had asked for my daughter's hand in marriage. But I didn't think about it, but Laban did here. So Jacob serves for these 7 years, very faithfully. And verse 20 records there, says, they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Oh, isn't that so sweet? And you thought Hallmark had good love stories. This is better, and this is right in the Bible. I love this. So after the 7 years, we hear wedding bells, and Jacob has his wedding night and wakes up in the morning. The scriptures say when morning came, there was Leah with Jacob. Who's Leah? Where'd she come from? I thought Rachel is the one that he was marrying, right? Well, in this great deceptive plot, Laban decided, Leah's the older sister of Rachel, that she shouldn't get married second. Rachel shouldn't get married first. So in this deceptive plot, he twists things around and he switches his daughters, and Jacob ends up marrying Leah. And I have one question when I think about that. Every time I come to this text, it's like, don't you think you'd know? I mean, don't you think you know if you're marrying one and a different one is showing up there? Well, commentators have tried to explain that away. They've said, well, maybe it was that there were a lot of veils that were always being worn through all of the festivities, and maybe Jacob was drunk, and so he wouldn't have had all his faculties around him. And I don't know if that's true or not, but one thing we do know is that Jacob married Leah. That's what happened. And how do you think Jacob feels? Jacob's ticked, right? Absolutely, he's ticked. Verse 25 says, so Jacob said to Laban, what is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you, deceived me? Laban's deception has turned two friendly relatives into enemies, and that's what deception does. Jacob certainly seems like he's the victim here, right? He's being taken advantage of, and he is. But this is not the only time that we read about Jacob and find him connected to deception. Not at all. There's another one I want to point out to you, and he certainly is not the victim there. Just a couple of chapters earlier in Genesis 27, we find Jacob and his older brother Esau. I know that many of you know some of these stories. Jacob and Esau are the sons of Isaac. And as was the custom, the eldest would get the special blessing that would come from dad. This was a big, big deal when this blessing would be placed on the oldest son, and he would get fortune, he'd get future, whatever the family had to offer, it was all going to go toward the oldest son. Well, Jacob knows that his brother Esau is about to get this blessing from dad Isaac, and so he fools him, he deceives him, he comes to him, Isaac's eyesight was not good, comes to him and tricks him into believing that Jacob, was actually Esau, and he's the one who gets the blessing. He's the one who gets Esau's blessing. Then Esau returns, he was gone, he comes back, and he's not happy, naturally. Remember, Jacob wasn't happy first. Now here we see Esau's not happy because of deception going on in the family. Esau says, chapter 27, then in verse 41, Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given to him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." When Rebekah, Jacob's mom, was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban." All right? So the circle of deception is now complete. It started by Jacob when he steals Esau's blessing, and the fruit of that deception is that he is now forced to leave his home, leave his mother, leave his comforts, leave the things that he knows, and he goes off to Laban, of all places, where now the deception is turned back on him. Because like we said earlier, where you are the deceiver, almost always it is going to turn around in some fashion or form, and it is going to come back on you. It's kind of fitting, isn't it? Kind of is, but it's also very tragic, all at the same time. Where deception is allowed to have its way, it tends to repeat itself over and over. That's what would happen in Jacob's family here also in the next generation when his sons now learn this pattern of deception and they are involved in this great deception against their own father as it relates to their brother Joseph, who comes on the scene, and now they convince him, deceive him into believing that that son Joseph is dead. You can see it's just going generation to generation, and Jacob ends up in a great depression. Do you want to know how to mess up a family? You want to know how to mess up your family? Keep secrets. Work against one another. Deceive one another. Tell lies and untruths when the stakes are really high. It's going to result in anger and pain and bitterness and broken relationships that quite possibly will never heal. Some of you know that this is true because some of you have experienced this in some fashion or form in your own family. Deception is devastating. In a family, though, every time truth wins, the family wins. Every time truth wins, the family wins. So if you want a flourishing family, whether you're a spouse or single or parent or child, don't allow deception. And wherever you see it, you push it out. Wherever you see it in your kids, you take it head on. You don't just stand back because you're afraid you're going to lose the child. You're afraid that now you're not going to be their friend as much anymore, and you need to stamp it out, because what you're going to end up with down the line is not something that you are going to want to sign up for. It is going to lead to additional trauma and pain, and whether you have the pain in the moment when you deal with it or you have it down the road, what is happening as it moves down the road is that there are additional traumas and pains that come up and additional separation that happens. So it's always best to get on it right now. Don't allow deception. That's where we start. Second essential that we can learn from Jacob and his family is to cast out competition. To cast out competition. For 7 years, Jacob served Laban, and he got Leah instead of Rachel. Jacob's devastated. So Laban offers him a plan. He says, "Tell you what, I'll give you Rachel. You can marry her too, but you've got to serve me for another 7 years." And Jacob was like, "That's okay. I'll do that because I love her that much. I want her that much." And with that, the stage is set for compromise, and it's set for competition. Obviously, right? There's going to be competition in this house. Imagine what it would be like in your house if you were married to 2 women at the same time and they're both sisters. You know what? Don't imagine that. It'd probably be better if you not. But here we have 2 women, both of whom are trying to win Jacob's affection. Of course, one of the primary ways to win a husband's affection in those days was to bear him sons. That was one of the main things that a guy was looking for out of a wife. And so Leah starts doing really well. The first 4 kids that are born to Jacob are all born to Leah. They're all sons. Leah 4, Rachel 0. And so Rachel's kind of getting desperate here because nothing is happening for her. And so she comes up with a plan. Chapter 30 and verse 1 says this: "When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, 'Give me children or I'll die.' Jacob became angry with her and said, 'Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?' Then she said, 'Here's Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her.' so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her. And sure enough, Bilhah goes and sleeps with Jacob, and she becomes pregnant. She bears him 2 sons. Then Leah realizes, I'm not having any more kids, so she sends her servant Zilpah into Jacob to have more kids. There's competition going on in this house, and it is not good. And she has a couple of kids. And then Leah has a couple more sons, and then a daughter. 11 kids. Rachel's sitting there. None of them are hers. What's going on in her mind, in her heart? She's devastated, of course. There's jealousy. There's disgrace. It's destroying her. Now, Rachel thinks that her problem is that she's not having children. Rachel's real problem is that she's in competition with 3 other women in her home for the love and affection of her husband. That's the problem. That's what her problems ultimately really stem from. It's the competition that is allowed to happen in this home. Now, in Old Testament times, it was not unusual for a man to have multiple wives or concubines. That was an accepted cultural practice, but it doesn't mean that it's an acceptable biblical practice. It wasn't God's desire. It wasn't God's design. God's design is laid out even earlier in Genesis when he tells us that marriage is to be one man and one woman united as one flesh. That's God's design. And wherever we see a violation of that standard, there's going to be a strife, there's going to be sacrifice blessing, and that's what's going on here. It was true then, and it's still true today. Still true today. Jacob allowed his home to be a place of competition, and it created an environment where there's tension and there's pain and there's distrust between everybody who is living there in this house. And you could just predict that this is what was going to happen. Just as you can predict that where there is competition that is allowed to exist in a home today, there is going to be challenge in much the same way. God has given us a design for our families. Sometimes that includes singleness. And some of you are, and we're going to talk about that here in a few weeks. Where there's marriage, it begins with, again, one man, one woman union. A lot of times that includes children. However, when we start to move away from God's plan, loyalties are split and competition ensues. And maybe you've seen it in your own house. Divorce is not God's design because in part it divides loyalties and it fosters harmful competition. When there are children who are involved, there are divisions that happen, and oftentimes there's kind of this competition for, which parent can get the child to like them most. What are we going to do about custody? And there are battles and all these things. And if there's step-parents that come into the equation, then oftentimes there's an additional layer of conflict that can happen between mom and stepmom or dad and stepdad, and it gets complicated. And some of you could tell your story of how this was not your design, this was not your desire. You can talk about how the truth of where there's competition that exists in relationships, that they can break down, they can be painful, they can be challenging. Similarly, it's devastating when a husband or wife allows his or her loyalties to become divided by someone other than your spouse. Friends, if you do, you can expect that same sort of conflict we see here with Rachel in her house. Husbands and wives, it is cruel to put your spouse in a competition with somebody else for your attention and affection. And if that's happening in your home, you need to get rid of that other relationship. You need to be done with it. Now. End it. Competition will destroy a house, whether from the parent, a child, a spouse, wherever it is. If you allow competition to rule or even to be present in your house, you are setting yourself up for a special challenge down the road. Not to find a flourishing family, but to find one of dysfunction. It's that serious. We need to hear it. We need to take care of it. Third lesson we can learn from this family is to fight off favoritism. To fight off favoritism. Favoritism was an element at virtually every stage in Jacob's life. As Jacob and his brother Esau were growing up, there was blatant favoritism going on in their house. Here's what the scripture says. It talks about Isaac, dad, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. How's this going to work out? I think you can pretty well figure it out. If you want a really messed up family, then pick a favorite among your kids and love them more than you love the others. That'll mess it up good. Compare one child against the other and withhold some affection for one, and you'll inflict wounds that very well might last a lifetime. Here's a word of caution for parents here today. Be careful what you say to other people about your kids. Be very careful, because it's important. I've heard some parents say things like, yeah, Amber, she's our different one. Or Paul, he's just not the athlete that his brothers are. Or we don't know where we got Jeff. It's usually said in jest, something to get a laugh. But do you really want to take the risk that it's going to get heard and then it gets repeated and it's heard again, and the devastation that that can possibly have? You don't want to take that risk. The implications can be disastrous, and they can linger for a lifetime. Jacob learned all about favoritism from his parents. Then he carried it on into his marriage. Then that carried on into the next generation as well. And if you know the story, eventually Rachel does become a mother. Eventually she has a child, Joseph. Dear Joseph. And it's very clear that Rachel and Jacob love Joseph the most. He's the favored one. He's the one who gets the beautiful multicolored coat that, according to the song, was red and yellow and green and brown and scarlet and black and ochre and peach and ruby and olive and violet and fawn and a bunch of other colors also. But it was clear they love him most. There was favoritism. But good thing is, didn't bother the brothers at all. Wrong. It bothered the brothers tremendously. It hurt them deeply. They develop a tremendous hatred toward Joseph, and they desire to kill him. That's why you fight against favoritism. It's that significant. If you want your kids to struggle with self-esteem, then let them know that you find greater joy in one of their siblings. And it's just subtle things. You don't come right out and say it. But they can pick up on it if that's really happening. On the contrary, if you want your family to flourish, then honor everyone in it. Don't fall into the trap of having certain expectations for who they'll be and somehow valuing them less if they don't end up in your mold. Value them for who they are, for how God has made them, for the desires that God has put in them, or for the talents, the abilities, the way that God has shaped them and formed them. Yes, every child is going to have difficult edges that need to be rounded off. Don't neglect discipline. Don't overlook sin. But lean into them. Lean into who they are. And celebrate that. And value them. And lift them up. And let them know that they are deeply loved, that they're a treasure to you. And here's an interesting twist on favoritism. Sometimes the one that you show favoritism most to in your house is you. Is you. And it's very clear that the things that the family's supposed to be working toward are really for your benefit. And so that you might be lifted up, so that you might be celebrated. Families that thrive need to learn to overcome selfishness. We need to make sacrifices for others and not just not to look just only at our own interests. That's true where it comes to spouses, when it comes to kids, when it comes to parents, whether you're in the house, whether you're out of the house. These are dynamic principles that we need to learn and live. If there was more time devoted to considering things from the perspective of others, we could fight off favoritism and we could flourish in our families. In Jacob's case, we see a number of very dysfunctional patterns that are happening. The deception that goes on and is allowed to continue. You've got the competition that is set up and is allowed to be present. You've got favoritism that is happening, but I told you that there's also some good stuff that happens here. And that is true, and we can see it as we go on, the final principle, which is to focus on forgiveness. To focus on forgiveness. When we're wronged or we feel we're wronged, there's a very natural tendency to want to get even. It's natural. One operating room nurse told of a story. She said, there was something that happened in the OR that I never thought I'd see, I never thought I'd hear. In the OR, there were actually a husband and wife. They were both there waiting for surgery. And both of them were there because they had gunshot wounds. And you might say, oh my goodness, what happened? Was there an intruder in the house? What happened? No, that's not what happened. What happened is the wife didn't set the alarm clock, And the husband woke up late for his first day at the new job. And he was angry with her about that, so he took a gun and shot her in the arm, which is, of course, how any of us would respond in a similar circumstance. No, you wouldn't respond like that. You might respond like she did. She was very upset, naturally, went into the other room, got a different gun, came out and shot him in the arm. And so now they're there. The nurse said she was pulling together the final paperwork. And here are this couple, separated by a deputy sheriff, each of them handcuffed to the gurneys that they were sitting on. And she said, I never thought I'd hear what I heard. Because in that moment, the husband spoke first to his wife and said, I love you, honey, and I'm sorry I shot you. To which the wife responded, I love you too, honey, and I'm sorry I shot you. And in that moment when I read it, I thought, this would be the perfect title to a country music song. Am I not right? I love you, honey, and I'm sorry I shot you. I'm telling you, that's got possibilities. If you want to write a hit song, there's your title right there, all right? Our natural tendency is to take revenge, though it looks like this couple may have even figured out that it's better to focus on forgiveness. Now, I would advise that you do that before the handguns are picked up, but you got to start somewhere, I guess, right? Look, the reason that forgiveness can be such a difficult thing is because it requires someone to say that they aren't going to pursue revenge, that they're going to take a different path. That's what we find as the story progresses. Remember that Jacob's favoritism told his son Joseph that his brothers, or led his brothers to hate him and to plot to kill him. Though in the end, they end up selling him into slavery. So Joseph is taken away from his home. He suffers at the hands of others. There are all sorts of circumstances that he goes through, the pain from situations he gets put in, but eventually he ends up in Egypt. And eventually, those of you who know the story know that he rises to a position of great power. And while he's in that position, there's a great famine that comes on the land, and all of the brothers, they need to find food, and so they come to Egypt to find food and end up appearing before Joseph. But they don't know it's Joseph, but he knows it's them. And friends, this is his opportunity. If he wanted to get revenge for the deception that they've carried out in his life, for the favoritism he's seen against him, for the competition that was this was his chance to get even. He could have had them killed if he wanted. He could have subjected them to a lifetime of slavery. He could have done anything he wanted, but he doesn't do any of those things. Instead, he weeps at the sight of his brothers and eventually reveals himself to them and tells them this. Says, and now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent you ahead of you. Joseph extends forgiveness, what we're talking about, to his brothers, and as a result, his family is restored. Friends, there's hope. His family, as dysfunctional as it was, is restored through this. They're rescued from the famine. They're given a new place to live in the choicest part of the land. Joseph is reunited together with his father, who thought he was dead. It's a beautiful scenario as it turns a different direction, all because this guy was willing to break the cycle of revenge and extend forgiveness. Look, we all want healthy homes. We all want places where God is honored. We want places that are not dysfunctional, but where we can flourish in those homes. But not all of us are there. In fact, none of us are where we ultimately need to be. But we can grow forward, and the story here gives us hope. Hope that there can be a change. Hope that we can move into something that is different. And I want to promise you that there is hope where you are. Now, I know that some of us are further down the road, or there might be damages and issues that have come up and have transpired, maybe because of some of these very things that we've been talking about, and you're down the road and you're wondering, yeah, it's too late for me. It's not too late for you. This is right at the end of Jacob's life that this whole transition happens. It wasn't too late for him, though he thought it along the way many times. If we'll get intentional, if we'll take the steps, we can see things change. Don't throw in the towel. I know some of you, your kids are out of the house. Some of you, your kids are high school, and you're thinking, it's too late. Too much water is passed over the dam, under the bridge. Maybe your kids are young and you're starting to see some things and it's like, man, I don't know that I can really navigate this well. Friends, here are some principles. We're going to talk about some more next week. I want you to be back for that as well. So we dig even deeper into what can we do in our homes to make them places where they can thrive. Wherever you are, whatever circumstance, whatever situation, it is never too late because we serve a God with whom anything is possible, including restoring relationships. Between you and an estranged son, between you and a teenage daughter who seems to hate you, and in fact, maybe has told you that, there is hope. Our families can flourish because we have a God who can lead and direct and change hearts. We need to be on our knees. We need to be praying. We need to be asking day by day by day by day that God would do his work in our kids, in our families, to bring hope where we've lost it, to bring healing where there's been brokenness. As we root out favoritism, as we root out competition, as we root out all of these things that we see present in this family, and as we focus on forgiveness, we can experience that hope and we can live in it. And I pray that you would have the courage, that you would have the confidence, that you would have the hope to press forward, to see your home become all that God desires it to be the flourishing family. Heavenly Father, we come as broken people. We come as ones who have experienced difficulty and struggle in homes, maybe in our home of origin growing up, maybe in the home that we are seeking to lead now, the home that we are a part of. Lord, there are challenges that come our way. Sometimes we wonder what we should do, how should we do it. I might be sitting here thinking there are far too many times I've allowed there to be deception. I've allowed it to go on, or I've allowed there to be competition, or I myself maybe showing favoritism. Father, help us to recognize it and arrest it and recognize that it's not too late and we need to be intentional and we need to step in and we need to be willing to do whatever is required, even if it's a difficult space to fill, even if it's a difficult decision to make, even if it's a difficult path to walk, so that we might experience forgiveness in our home, so that we might experience healing, so that we might live in hope. Father, I pray for each one who is listening right now, whether in the room or elsewhere. You know what each situation is. You know the hope that we need to find from you, and I pray that we might experience that we can look at this story and see a family that was in such disarray that turned around. Lord, I pray that for each one of us, that we would experience healthy, flourishing families. And we submit ourselves to you toward that end. In Jesus' name, amen.